with like Jaws and like with the metal teeth. And then they did Timothy Dalton for 2, which those were like dark. They went dark.
That's
and then they went back to campiness kind of with Pierce Brosnan, that's who I grew up with. So he was one of my favorite James Bonds. And then Daniel Craig's been kind of carrying it the rest of the way.
So yeah,
Pierce Brosnan.
So that's the start of episode 265 of the In the Tank podcast. We're going to be talking about Twitter and Facebook and this whole Hunter Biden situation. Maybe we'll talk about, depending on how long that conversation goes, we might talk about some COVID lockdown type stuff, but we'll see what happens. On this episode, as always, I'm your host, Donald Kendall. And joining us, we got the normal crew here. We've got Justin Haskins, editorial director at the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I am doing well, Donald.
And who's your favorite James Bond?
I don't have a favorite James Bond, really. I think it's like apples to oranges. Different eras. You can't compare.
It's a good point.
Across eras. I think it's too difficult to do.
That's a good way to avoid controversy. Isaac O, our research fellow at the Center of the American Experiment. Do you want to also dodge the question, or do you have a favorite James Bond?
No, it's Sean Connery, and if you have another opinion, you're wrong. Pierce Brosnan should have stuck to Mrs. Doubtfire and getting fruit thrown at his head.
It was a drive-by fruiting.
Yeah, it was a drive-by fruiting. I was Mrs. Doubtfire for Halloween when I was in kindergarten, I believe.
That makes perfect sense.
Do that again this year. See how it works out.
Jim Likely, VP of the Heartland Institute. Why do you even show up to this? Like, isn't this like below your pay grade? Like to be in the same room
Jim Likely or Isaac?
Jim Likely.
Oh,
yeah. Well,
I'll be all your bosses someday.
Yeah, that's right. Isaac's going to rule us all at one point with his genius. He's got a big, bright future. But for the record, my favorite James Bond actually is Roger Craig. It's not Roger Moore. It's Daniel Craig. I actually think he's done a fantastic job. Casino Royale is one of my all-time favorite movies, period. I think that movie is just so perfect. It's exciting. And he does a great job at it.
Yeah, I just watched that a couple of nights ago, staying up with the baby. So, that's how we got on all this stuff.
Full of trash now.
Well, I will say the last thing on this whole James Bond topic before we move on to something much more important is Isaac, like the Sean Connery James Bond is like totally canceled in this day and age. Like the way that he dealt with women and stuff, it just does not fly in 2020.
That's why Isaac likes him so much.
He's speechless.
Plus, his voice is more fun to do. It's like,
his voice is better.
Anal bum cover for 300, please. That's an album cover.
So I wanted to start off this not talking about James Bond. I wanted to talk a little bit about like the hearings with Amy Coney Barrett. See, Justin, I got the name right.
You did. It's not Comey. Like Jim Comey. That's what Donnie likes to say, unfortunately.
But that story is so like inconsequential compared to the story that I do now want to talk about, which is this Hunter Biden thing. So, I mean, are you fine with me vetoing this topic, everybody?
So you're saying that a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court is less important than the news clip that's going to be around for the next 30 minutes.
Well, what I'm saying, like, if there was something crazy that came out of this hearing, then yes, I would talk about it. But as of now, it seemingly just is going by the books. I mean, the most
deal. She's in.
The most headline grabbing thing is that she used the word sexual preference, and then people pretended like they were upset.
Yeah.
So did you miss? You must.
Do you want to talk about that?
You missed the part where Amy Klobuchar said, "I'd like to see how your hair would fare in a blizzard."
I had a thought when I saw something about her. Like,
she's so
I want to respond to every one of her tweets with like that line. But
Donald Trump. So the science is on my side.
So I don't know. It seems like a non-story. I mean, does it seem like there's anything that's going to stop it?
No, nothing's going to stop it.
Yeah. So why are we going to talk about it?
Her answer on climate change would be
the
thing that stops it, even though that was like a total false argument as well. She's
Yeah.
like,
So moving on.
Yeah.
So this Hunter Biden story in the New York Post, right? So this happened Wednesday. So I see it, comes out on Wednesday. I read it. I'm like, oh, that's pretty crazy. All right, let's get back to work. So I start going back to work, whatever, moving on with my day. But then the thing that really irked me about the whole situation, and the thing that I think that we're going to talk about for this segment, is the seemingly coordinated actions by Facebook and Twitter to suppress the story. Like they were so egregious, these things that Facebook and Twitter did, that I was like, all right, like I didn't want to talk about this story in of itself on the podcast, but now because of what Twitter and Facebook did, we have to talk about this. So Jim, just for context, anyone that's not paying attention to the news cycle or whatever, can you do us the elevator pitch of what that story was even about?
You mean the Hunter Biden story or the suppression of the story by social media?
The New York Post story.
Well, the New York Post story basically outlined how, actually they found a laptop that Hunter Biden left at a computer repair shop, or one of his staffers left at a computer repair shop, and signed a contract. And, if you drop off any of your electronics somewhere or anything somewhere, and you don't pick it up after told that it's ready for you after 90 days, that becomes the property of whoever was fixing it. And that's on those little things that you signed. If you do that at Best Buy, they would probably do the same thing. And so Hunter Biden, the guy who owns the shop, was looking at the computer and saw some things that he thought was troubling, and he handed it over to the FBI. Now, this is interesting because the FBI has done nothing with it for a year. He also decided to let the Trump campaign know about it. Apparently, he gave it to Rudy Giuliani, who then gave the laptop and all of its email contents and photos and all sorts of stuff, including apparently a sex tape that Hunter Biden had on his MacBook. That's wonderful. And of course, it is so 2020, so 21st century that everybody's got a sex tape. I don't, but everybody else does, apparently. Let's move on. So the
little projection there, Timothy.
I walked into that one.
Moving on.
So
somebody better wipe that computer clean.
Right.
Don't bring it into the repair shop.
I don't. Yeah. See, just first of all, if your computer's broken, throw it away. That's one of the things here.
Throw it in the microwave.
That's right. Between Anthony Weiner
and hard drive.
Between Anthony Weiner's laptop problems, which was or computer problems, which was the problem in the big salacious story leading into the 2016 election. Now we have another laptop with salacious materials on it coming up in the 2020 election. This is great. And, great. I don't know. Anyway, so there was emails on here where it basically lays out the fact that what everybody who actually reads anything other than legacy mainstream media already knew, that Hunter Biden's position at Burisma Holdings, which is an energy company in Ukraine, was entirely dependent on the fact that his father was vice president and in charge of Ukraine policy at the time during the last few years of the Obama administration. Everybody knew this that reads anything other than the New York Times. But there was proof with emails on this laptop that laid it out in more detail. And actually, one of the emails, one of the his employers in the Ukraine thanked Hunter Biden for that wonderful introduction with your dad. And so this matters because Joe Biden has been saying, I don't know anything about any of this. I had never talked to my son about his business dealings. And it's going to be drip, drip, drip. Now, fewer than 20 days to the election of these sorts of things coming out that were going to be suppressed, except for, Hunter Biden is a layabout, no good son who brings his MacBook in to get repaired and doesn't pick it up. And then all this explodes.
Well, maybe Joe isn't his dad. Ever think of that, Jim?
That might be what they go with next because their excuses so far have not been pretty good. They actually haven't denied in substance what the New York Post has reported.
Yeah, maybe I'm watching too many James Bond movies recently, but the whole bringing the MacBook or the computer to the repair shop, and then that's just how Rudy Giuliani somehow gets a hold of it. Seems like there's some other stuff going on here.
Yeah, doesn't that seem fishy to you?
It seems a little fishy, doesn't it?
Well,
okay,
either the stuff on the computer is legit and true, or it isn't. It doesn't. I don't care where it ended up.
I don't doubt that it's true. It's
I know, but if you're Hunter Biden and you're getting $60,000 a month or something from Burisma, and you're going to take your laptop to the repair shop, just go buy a new one, man.
Right. Well.
In fairness, he was high out of his mind most of the time. So You never know. I mean,
Allegedly.
he did allegedly return a rental car once with a bunch of, I think, cocaine all over the trunk or the seat or something like that, or dashboard. I can't
Like, why
remember.
wouldn't you use it before you return the car?
Well, those are many of the questions that we wish the mainstream media would ask Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. Why
Biden.
didn't your son use all of the cocaine that he had?
Why did your son waste this precious resource?
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree with what Donnie said here. I think that it is very interesting, very, very interesting, the way that this story is laid out. I think there is definitely more to this than meets the eye as far as how they got access to this information. The shop owner says it could have been Hunter Biden, but he's not really sure. He can't really remember for sure if that was the person who dropped the computer off. There's just way too many weird things going on here. Supposedly the owner numerous times tried to contact the owner with the contact information that he was given and could not get a hold of this person. Somehow this person, he knew enough to make a copy of the hard drive because the computer was actually taken by federal officials. And then he had the copy of the hard drive is what he then leaked to the lawyer, I believe, for Rudy Giuliani. And so how does he know who the lawyer for Rudy Giuliani is? Like, how would you, if you're just some random shop owner, like, how do you figure that out? Like, somebody would have had to have told you, right? There's more to this for sure. However,
Justin, have you just never Googled who Rudy Giuliani's lawyer is before?
No,
I haven't.
Who has?
Yeah, I haven't. I mean, it might be out there, but I doubt it. So the point is this. Regardless of whether there's definitely something suspicious there, but if the information is true, as Jim said, that it's an important story for a variety of reasons, but the biggest one is that we are less than 3 weeks away from an election where Joe Biden could become president of the United States, winning in the polls. He could become president of the United States, and we are now finding out what many people on the right have known for a very, very long time, as Jim said, that he seems to be a very corrupt person who's been involved in all sorts of very corrupt business dealings, either directly or indirectly. And there should be a federal investigation of this, because if we find out that Hunter Biden was somehow funneling some of this money to Joe Biden, then that would be a crime. That would be a federal crime. And this guy could be president of the United States in a few weeks. So this is all very important information, and people deserve to know what is going on. And that's what leads us to the next part of all of this with the social media and the way that they reacted.
So up through forever, a news story is presented, people read it, and then they come up to their own decision whether or not, they buy it or, look for the little loopholes or anything like that. Not in this day and age, because now we're in a world where Facebook and Twitter basically gets to control, the whole narrative. So there's an article here. This is a CNBC article that is Facebook, Twitter make editorial decisions to limit distribution of story claiming to show smoking gun emails related to Biden and his son. So it says Facebook and Twitter decided to limit distribution of a New York Post story that claims to show a smoking gun, blah, blah, blah. That's in the title. By the way, why are titles getting so long? Headlines are getting so long. I think they're realizing that people just read those, so they make them like a paragraph long now. Beside the point. So the editorial decision to reduce the spread of the story, which provides minimal evidence, yeah, thanks for throwing that in there, is a significant one for Facebook. The social media company has long professed to stand for freedom of speech and rejected the idea that it is the arbiter of truth. So they're not rejecting it anymore, because they basically get to decide what people get to read and what people get to share, because this story was totally scrubbed on Twitter and Facebook. In fact, I tried to post it myself just to see. I couldn't post it. So I kept saying that it failed to post. So, yeah, it's pretty bizarre, but I don't know. I mean, Jim, do you want to kind of throw your 2 cents in here right off the bat?
Well, yeah, actually, this is actually the real story. I care a little bit about the Hunter Biden story itself, but the real story here is actually quite kind of dangerous when it comes to free speech and, frankly, our country and the future of our country. We are fewer than 20 days away from the election. A story harmful to the Biden campaign comes out, and basically our social media giants, big tech, and the mainstream media, they're instantly become the volunteer fire department for the Biden campaign. You're not allowed to see this story. It's too harmful to Biden, under the most the thinnest of excuses and explanations for it. That it wasn't sourced correctly, or this is information that could be harmful. Yeah, harmful to Biden, not harmful to anybody else. They wanted to suppress the story, frankly, absolutely, because it was going to harm the Biden campaign. Now, why did this happen? This happened because the people that are at the top levels of the communications departments and the people who make the decisions about how Twitter and Facebook are run are all former Democratic operatives, all of them. I can't imagine that Sean Spicer, for instance, former spokesman for Trump, would have sent in an application to Twitter to be in their communications department. They would have said, "Hey, how about you come on in for an interview? We'll consider you. You've actually got a lot of experience here." No, the guy who is like, I think, head of communications for Twitter is a former spokesperson for Kamala Harris. The guy at the top of the communication shop at Facebook is a former spokesperson for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee for Democrat Senators Barbara Boxer and John Kerry, and the House PAC, or whatever, the PAC that is there to get Democrats elected into office, into Congress. This is not an accident. You have to. Are we to believe that actually, it could have happened organically? These people saw these stories that were damaging to Biden and decided, we got to shut it down. We're going to stop people from being able to share this. We're going to keep people from being able to reading it through our platforms. I find it actually more likely that they got a call from the Biden campaign and said, "Hey, man, because you're my old buddy. Hey, pal, you got to help us out. This is terrible. You got to shut this down." And they didn't just make it, this idea that they just made it a little harder to look at Facebook. We're going to just, just tamp it down a little bit so that it's not so easily shareable. That's crazy, because they instantly started nuking from space every account, as you just mentioned, Donnie, every account that decided to share this New York Post story. The New York Post, which is a paper, I believe, founded by Alexander Hamilton in 1801. This newspaper is the oldest continuous newspaper in the United States.
Wow.
And it was, and Twitter shut down their Twitter account. Their Twitter account got frozen. Kayleigh McEnany, the spokesperson for Donald Trump, her account got frozen. This
not a spokesperson. She's the White House
press secretary. That's right. Had her account frozen. The Trump campaign, Team Trump, at Team Trump, that account was nuked from space. It was suspended, all because they wanted to share this story from the New York Post. And the idea that it is thinly sourced is such BS, because we have been inundated with stories that don't even have any sources, anonymous sources, on Trump's taxes. On the entire Russia hoax was completely fake news, and that was shared widely for years and years and years. So I actually think the big story here is that big tech is basically attacking the American people and their ability to share and read news.
Well, okay,
because they are partisans for the Democrats and for Joe Biden.
So I was talking to Justin before we started recording, and he brought up that the press secretary and the Trump campaign being shut down, right? Their accounts were shut down on Twitter, and they're basically told that they could have their account back once they delete their tweet. Have you ever heard of this before? Because I've seen, like, even Donald Trump, they've deleted some of his tweets, right? Like, he'll post something, they deleted it. They've never held the account ransom and forced them to do something before they'll relinquish control of the account. I've never heard of that before. Maybe I'm missing out.
There have been examples of it.
Really?
Yeah. It's not super common. The more common thing is to block the post or put some kind of disclaimer beneath it, or whatever, send a warning to the person who posted it. But it has happened. In fact, not that long ago, the Blaze, the entire account for the Blaze on, I believe, Facebook, was shut down. I don't think it was totally like completely shut down. I think it may have been that it was tampered, they tampered it down so that when they post things, it wasn't being displayed to most people. But I believe that the reason that they were given was because they have some sort of 3-strike policy about displaying false or misleading information. And they had claimed that there were they had made 3 posts that were, distributing this false information, and that they wouldn't like unlock the account so that everyone who follows it could see it until they remove those posts. So a similar kind of thing. I don't think they banned it outright. Like, you could still go to the Blaze and find their Facebook page, but I think that you wouldn't see their information pop up on your feed until they remove those posts. And there was some kind of I think they were getting ready for a legal battle. I don't know what ended up happening with it, but the point is, this isn't that uncommon. It does happen. But in this case, what was so crazy about it was the fact that it was so widespread. I've never seen this before. I've never seen them say, okay, well, we're going to stop literally millions and millions and millions of people from sharing this link. Like, we're not even going to allow them to share it. We're not even going to allow them to DM it. They can't even privately share it with each other.
Yeah, that was crazy.
That is crazy. Like, that is crazy. It wasn't even just posted publicly. You can't even share it with your friend, or your mom. Like, I can't send it to my mom. It's like, what? Why?
Right.
This is insane. And yet that was what they did. I've never seen that before. They literally censored overnight.
How
millions of people.
Let's stop on that one point there for a minute, because could T-Mobile or whatever your cell phone carrier, whoever carries your coverage, could they stop me sending a link in a text message to somebody? Like, how could they stop DMs? I just don't get it.
I don't think it's. I mean, it's a little bit different. It's a different system. I don't even think T-Mobile would be able to do that in the same kind of way, probably technologically speaking. But maybe they could. I don't think so, though. I think it's a different system. But the point is, yeah, you're right. I mean, I mean, if they can do this, then can Google, for example, Google has messenger systems, right? And the people have on their phones. Isn't WhatsApp, isn't that Google? Or one of those is Google. They have a Google messaging system. Facebook has one. Facebook Messenger, same thing, right? You can just basically send text messages to your friends or whatever through this messaging app. Could they do that? Could they block that? I guess so. I guess they could. I mean, I don't think this may be the first time in history of the United States that tens of millions of people were stopped from sending information to each other on any kind of a platform. Right. I bet this has never happened before. I bet that you've never had this many people silenced all at one time, so in such a strong way, where you couldn't even send a link to a news article to your friends. I mean, I don't think this has ever happened.
So one of the first things that came out was a tweet from a spokesman from Facebook, Andy Stone, who said, "While I will intentionally not link to the New York Post, I want to be clear.
That's because he couldn't, by the way,
that this story
would have been blocked.
That this story is eligible to be fact checked by Facebook's third-party fact-checking partners. In the meantime, we are reducing its distribution on our platform." So it's like they're reducing the distribution on their platform before they even fact check it and determine that it's not worthy of sharing. There's just so many layers of this that is just absurd. And I think at the surface level, it's just the hypocrisy.
Well, and
where's this lack of authoritative reporting during the 3 years of the bogus Russia collusion conspiracy? They didn't stop any of those articles from being spread on social media. It's just it's crazy.
Well, and I think that we don't want them trying to stop those stories on social media.
No.
We just want them to let people share information and make up their own minds. That's what we're looking for here. We're not asking for a lot. If you're a platform and you're supposedly an open platform, then you should be allowing people to speak freely, as long as what you're saying is not, obviously there are limits, right? We don't want videos of people getting beheaded, and we don't necessarily need pornographic images and stuff like that. We understand there has to be some standards, but this is just a news report.
Well, then some of Hunter Biden's stuff can't be shared.
Well, some of it can't be. Actually, that's true. And if all they had done is said, "Hey, we're not going to show the pornographic videos of him doing coke while having sex with some random woman," then fine. I'm okay with that. But instead, they won't even let us see the emails, which are not even, they won't even let us see emails in these pictures. And then the excuse that they gave, was it Twitter? Who gave the excuse about the hacking? Who said
Twitter.
that?
Yeah.
Twitter.
Said that.
So Twitter said that the reason they didn't allow it wasn't because it hadn't been fact checked, but because the story contained, illegally obtained information from under their hacking policy. So because of that, they wouldn't let people share this news story. That in and of itself is probably the dumbest argument I've ever heard, considering just a couple of, a month ago, less than a month ago? When was the tax return story that came out? Donald Trump
3 weeks ago. Yeah.
Right. Donald Trump tax returns. The New York Times ran a big, gigantic story. It was everywhere for a week about they had obtained Donald Trump's tax returns illegally because Donald Trump never agreed to give his tax returns. So somebody gave them to the New York Times illegally. They broke the law.
Right.
And nobody had a problem with us seeing those, with all that information being shared all over the place. It's personal financial information that legally you are not allowed to just distribute to people at will. And yet they were allowed to do it because they have the First Amendment protection to report the news. And whoever leaked it to them did that illegally. And yet they had no problem with sharing that information. But now this comes out and all of a sudden it's like no one's allowed to see it because maybe it's not true. And one last thing, Facebook wants to fact check it. They said, right? Fact check it. They're going to how the hell are you going to fact check it, Facebook? You don't have the emails. You don't have the computer. You have no way of fact checking it. It is new information. That's the whole point. How are you going to fact check something that you have no ability to fact check? It's obviously crap. So now is Facebook going to run around and say, well, unless you can prove it to us, then we're not going to allow it on our platform anymore. Well, if that's true, then they're publishers. They are no longer platforms. That is gone. That is out the window. You are not a platform if you have an editorial department deciding what's true and what's not true. That's the definition of a publisher.
Yeah,
give me a break.
Right. I mean, some of these quotes when they were talking about like, oh, this doesn't reach our journalistic standards, or it's along those lines. But it's like, who talks like that other than an editor at a newspaper? Like I think we've crossed the line of this being an open platform and this being a publisher. Like this, I think we crossed that line a while ago, but now we are like yards from that line in the other direction. It really seems like they're a publisher.
Who was it that we had on the podcast, a month or two ago, who joined Facebook's, editorial standards
from Cato,
thing?
right?
Right, from Cato, and he was assuring us that this board's going to be there to make sure everything's on the up and up, and that conservatives and conservative voices aren't being stifled, and this is a real landmark movement for them. I mean, God bless them. And I tried to be polite, but I said I think flat out you're being naive, and I think a lot of people on our side who've been watching this happen for years think you're a patsy. You're being used to put a patina of fairness over what is obviously unfair decisions being made by the most powerful companies on earth. If you don't think this, and this of course happens with Google too, people might remember, you might be able to Google it, but maybe you couldn't, because Breitbart actually issued a report. They were on Tucker, I think, a couple months ago, but they have talked about how for pretty much the last year, if you Google stories, Breitbart does not show up until like page 8. Even if you put the word Breitbart in the search for something that's in the news, they won't show up because Google, one of the most powerful companies in the history of human civilization, has decided that Breitbart is going to be pushed down, and we will favor left-wing media outlets, or the so-called mainstream media, which is also left-leaning. This is a huge, huge deal. This is a huge story, and I am enjoying a little bit what they call the Streisand effect, where named after Barbara Streisand. I think there was a story that showed like what her house looks like in Malibu from like from a helicopter or something, and she demanded that somebody take this down, and they did. But then all that did was make sure that more people saw it as well. She actually did the same thing with Jonah Goldberg, columnist for the LA Times. She said, "You must remove Jonah Goldberg from the LA Times. He is an outrage. We can't have this conservative on my newspaper." And it just made people want to read Jonah Goldberg even more. So there is a Streisand effect going on here with the Hunter Biden story.
Yeah,
and
we wouldn't be talking about it.
Yeah, this egregious, heavy-handed hammer that's been pulled down by these big tech giants has drawn more attention to it. But the big story here is that they have the power to do this, and they are doing it with impunity. They actually don't care now. They have to realize how bad this looks, and they had to actually realize before they suppressed the tweets of people linking to this story, before they took away the ability of the New York Post to even use Twitter, they had to know, somebody had to tell them, this is going to be a big blowback. And they decided it's worth it. It's worth it. That's the big story here.
When you are censoring the White House press secretary, how do they not? That's not like some intern. That's not like some intern in the fact-checking department that's like, you know what? I'm going to censor her. Like, that's not how that works. Like, that was run by some people, like a bunch of people. Like, that goes all the way to the top. That you don't ban the White House press secretary from speaking on your platform without running that by some people. And so, and then to ban the Trump campaign. I mean, these kinds of things in the middle of literally less than 3 weeks away from an election, you're banning the Trump campaign from speaking on your platform because they shared an article in the New York Post. Like, this is crazy, crazy, crazy stuff. And the thing is, it's progressively gotten worse over time. We've been talking about this for a long time. It's progressively getting worse. And so what comes after this?
Yeah.
What's next? I mean, it's only going to get worse from here. It's not going to get better.
Yeah, because we talked about in the past, them starting to label stuff as like, oh, this is fake news. Click this link to see the truth about climate change or something like that. They'll put the little disclaimer on. Fast forward to today, and they're just like totally just trying to just like information hole, so, like some articles, right? And then like what happens in a few months from now? Like, are they going to allow, once they acknowledge this idea that climate change is this existential threat that they have to take super seriously and all of that, like what's stopping them from being like, Heartland Institute, we can't allow you to have this platform?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, Isaac, do you think that's too much of a slippery slope, or do you think that's realistic?
Well, I just tried sending this article to Justin on Twitter and Facebook, and it was just weird. Twitter was immediately, you can't send this. So no, I think I just had to experience it for myself, right?
Yeah.
But no, I don't think that that's too slippery of a slope. I mean, I would have never thought that this, of all things, like, oh, so some politician has a worthless kid, like, oh, like, why is that news? We had a president who did that.
Sure.
Strategery. So like, okay, yeah, that's fine. But yeah, this seems weird. Like, this is so inconsequential too. Like, Hunter Biden is like crooked. Who would have guessed? Like, everyone knew that anyway. Why is this something that's worth censoring like this?
Because it's worth censoring because it severed the very thin plausible deniability that Joe Biden had that he had anything to do with any of this.
Well, sure, I get that, but does anyone really care about that either? Like,
probably not.
They do now. They care about it more now than they would have yesterday.
But that's what I mean, right?
Right.
Like, so
probably not. Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly how I started off this whole thing. I read that article and I was like, oh, wow, that's pretty crazy. Moving on, so I get it. Like, I'm with you, Isaac. It's just the whole crackdown from the social media. That's the way bigger story, in my opinion.
I just assumed everyone thought politicians were already that corrupt and that this is unfortunately not news.
I guess. Yeah. We just have to like make sure that people don't think that about Biden 3 weeks before the election.
Yeah. Well, look, you talk about the slippery slope, and this slope was created a while back. I think it was 4 years ago that the Los Angeles Times decided that nobody who does not agree with the idea that human activity is causing a catastrophic climate crisis. If you are a climate realist, if you want to push back on that using science, using data, and having your opinion, they were not accepting any more letters to the editor. They said, we're not taking any more op-eds. We're not going to publish any more stuff from you climate deniers. They did this 4 years ago, and it was the Los Angeles Times and Heartland Institute. Obviously, we do this topic a lot. Took note of that. The New York Times followed suit. And a lot of other publications have. It's actually pretty hard to get, one of our columnists, one of our experts who writes an op-ed, to get that thing published in a major newspaper in this country, because they all have that policy now, and that's just the way things go. And so this is an extension of that. This is all part of that. The idea that Facebook and Twitter now, and frankly, just I would imagine a bunch of, a committee of 25-year-olds who decide that their political preferences are the truth, and anybody else who thinks differently than them is lying and offering disinformation. That's the key word here. They either use misinformation or disinformation. And to them, anybody who looks at the data and shows that, the Earth's, like for instance, sea level rise is actually not accelerated for the last 200 years, and you show the data that is from government websites, that is disinformation, and they will disallow it. Tucker Carlson, just the other night, he had put on Facebook, as an example of this, he did a little segment where he went to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, got their own data that showed that wearing a mask or not wearing a mask didn't seem to make any difference on whether you got COVID-19. That 85% of the people that were tested positive in the United States for COVID-19 said they wore a mask all the time or most of the time. And that's all he did. He was pulling, and this was from the CDC's own website. Facebook flagged it as fake, as potentially and at least partially fake news. And all he is doing is sharing information on an official government website. And so this is what's happening here. And this is extremely insidious, because only one side, actually only the leftist government approved line on any topic of any controversy is going to be allowed to be shared and published on these platforms like Facebook and Twitter. And we've talked about this before. We don't want to go into the weeds of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, but there was a bargain that these big tech companies made with Congress. When their business models were just getting started, when really the internet was still pretty new, that because they are for open communication, they're for the sharing of information among people, that they would not be treated as a publisher, but they would be a platform. And they made a bargain that they would only adjust or act as a publisher, quasi-publisher, in good faith. Right. This scandal here is that they have never acted in good faith, and they are not acting in good faith in the Biden story, because they let all of this Trump nonsense, all of this fake news today on Twitter. You can share the story that Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer, met secretly with Russian agents in Prague. That is 100% false and fake news. Today, you can share that on Twitter, but you can't share this story for the New York Post on Hunter Biden. That is an extremely dangerous situation in a supposedly free country, and it's actually a danger to democracy and, wait for it, interference in our election.
Well, we don't have a democracy, Jimothy. We have a republic.
Okay. So there's two things there, though. I do want to get into both of them. One is, is this not election meddling? I mean, we suddenly have these journalistic standards when it comes to a potentially fake news story about Joe Biden, but we allow all the other ones to run about Trump. And then also, what if it's 100% true and they just throttled it for no reason? They find out a month from now, oops, wrong. We were sorry. Yeah, that was actually completely true. Biden is a super corrupt politician. Sorry, we allowed, we stopped that from getting around right before he was elected. Whoops. All right, moving on. It seems like flat out election meddling. I don't know. Maybe that's going too far.
But, I don't think so.
No, I mean, I don't know how. Look, what sparked this whole? You got to remember, going back to 2016, the reason that Facebook and Twitter and all of the CEOs of all these companies were dragged before Congress was because some Russian agents threw up a few $100 or $1,000 worth of Facebook ads and stuff like that on social media. Right. And that supposedly affected the election. They had multi-million-dollar intelligence investigations into that. They did congressional investigations. They had the Senate did an investigation. The intelligence community had an investigation, all to look into Russian interference in the election. And in one day, Twitter and Facebook did more interfering than the whole nation of Russia did in 2016 to interfere with this election. There's just no question about it whatsoever. They literally stifled people, millions, tens of millions of people, from talking about an important news story. And they did it for everyone. They even did it against liberals. Well, liberal couldn't even share the story and say that they think it's not true. They couldn't even do that. Right. No one was allowed to talk about it. It was pure insanity. And it does show how dangerous these companies are, how much power they have. 43% of adults in this country, 43% say that they get news from Facebook. 43%. So if almost half the adults in this country get their news from Facebook, and Facebook is able to decide what qualifies as news and what doesn't, then they have a massive amount of power over this country. And it cannot be allowed. They cannot be allowed to have this kind of power over what people know.
So, Jim, you brought up the whole repealing Section 230, right? And Trump had talked about this. He capped off one of his tweets ranting about this story with, I think, all caps, repeal 230. So, I mean, to you, is this justification to dismantle these protections from social media? These protections, and maybe you should kind of explain exactly what those protections are.
Well, the Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act protects protections. So, for instance, I mean, we talked about this on that podcast with the guy from Cato, who's on the useless Facebook board. but the idea is that, look, Twitter is just allowing people to share things with other people. They should not be held, liable, literally in court, sued for libel, and have monetary damages awarded for somebody else sharing a story. It's like, look, we got billions of posts every day. We cannot remotely share all this stuff or vet it, it would just ruin our business model. Same thing with Facebook. And so we need an exception for that to allow that to happen. And, we could get sued. Actually, the Heartland Institute could be sued if we publish something libelous on our Heartland Daily News site. Because we are a publisher and we're treated as such by the law. Twitter and Facebook were not treated as publishers because they promised that they would have open platforms and would only meddle with what was actually put up there in good faith. As I mentioned earlier, this is not in good faith. This is a partisan. Attempt to swing the election. So that's where you get your election interference. And so the idea that now, people on the right have been conflicted, I should say, on what to do with Section 230. Should it be enforced? Should that exception be pulled from Twitter and Facebook? I think it was Ben Domenech reading in one of his emails, the transom this morning. He had noted that we're going to look back and Twitter and Facebook are going to think, if only we could just go back to having Section 230 enforced against us. That's the quaint, easy, light touch. I think this is a bomb. This is an explosion that they're not going to be able to recover from potentially, because now people are talking about breaking them up and really doing damage because they have abused. We've known that they've abused their power, the power they have in social media for years and years in favor of one side of political debates and political elections. And now it's there for all to see over Hunter Biden. That's the thing that's so funny, over Hunter Biden. I mean, that is a very small hill to die on, if you ask me, but they've been abusing this power for a long time. And now I think there's a reckoning that's going to be coming for them.
Yeah. Justin, so I don't think you can't. So I don't believe that we will ever get to a point in time when we will just totally throw Section 230 out the window. I mean, they might replace it. I mean, they might repeal it and replace it with something that's better. But you're never going to totally get rid of it, because the whole reason Section 230 exists is because having online platforms like Facebook and Twitter, and even comment sections on websites is essentially impossible without that protection that's in Section 230. Because what happens is anytime anyone goes on to Twitter without Section 230 and posts something that isn't true, Twitter could be held liable for that information being posted, depending on what it is. And so you could have people suing Twitter constantly, right? Or suing Facebook constantly. You couldn't have comment sections or forums or anything like that. And so the internet, as we understand it today, basically couldn't exist, at least much of it. And so you have to have something like Section 230. Without that, you can't have platforms at all. Social media dies, and nobody wants social media to die. Not really. Yeah. So you have the important thing that needs to be done, though, is the law needs to be clarified, because when it was written, it was written so vaguely that it can be interpreted, and that's exactly what these social media companies are doing, to ban material that the law was never intended to allow these companies to ban as open platforms. So, and it says that very clearly if you read there's part of the law that even says what the intent of the law is trying to do. It's trying to foster speech. It's trying to encourage more of it. And what Facebook is doing, what Twitter is doing, they're trying to stop speech. They're not trying to encourage it. So, they need to clarify the law. They need to make it specific. They need to make it very clear what you're allowed to ban and what you're not allowed to ban while still being considered a platform, so that you can ban pornography, for example, if you want, on Twitter, or videos of people getting beheaded or something like that. But you can't ban just political speech, because that's not the same thing. And they need to make that very clear. The language is way too vague in the law. So that's what really needs to happen. So the idea that we're going to overturn it, just throw it out, that's never going to happen.
So like laws being too vague and then being interpreted in different ways, that's like something that seemingly happens all of the time and makes sense, obviously. So what happens in this current scenario where you've got what was supposed to be an open platform acting as a publisher? Like, does that just get like sorted out in court eventually? Or is there some type of punishment that could be casted down if they're kind of breaking these rules? Like, what happens?
Well, what's really interesting about this is that the Trump administration this is a federal law, and federal agencies have essentially been given the leeway to interpret this law and apply it. And the Trump administration has issued executive orders essentially saying that you can't ban political speech, and that you're not allowed to use Section 230 as a shield to just ban political speech that you don't like. And so that should be the prevailing interpretation, I would think. But now we're getting into a really complicated area of law where you're going to have case law, and you're going to have cases that have happened in the past, and how courts have decided that, and have different courts decided it different ways. And does this eventually need to be decided in the appellate court system? It's going to get really complicated. I don't know the answer to your question, and I don't think any of us do, because we don't know the case law. But the reality is, the only solution to the problem ultimately is changing the law. That has to happen, and just about everyone agrees that it needs to change. The difference, though, and this is why I don't know what's going to happen in the near term, is what conservatives want is to change the law so that there can be more free speech, political speech. What the left wants to do is to change the law so that there's less political speech. And so they want to change the law too. The left is mad that we're allowed to spread fake news, as they would say, and alternative facts, and anything that doesn't disagree with their narrative. And so they actually want to change the law to make it less possible to have free speech. So if you have a divided Congress, there is no way this law gets changed, because they have diametrically opposed views of what kind of speech should be permitted on open platforms. And in countries like Germany and in France, they've already passed laws that have actually created more restrictions on social media companies to ban even more kinds of speech. And that's the kind of thing that the left here wants to do. For example, in Germany, if you post something that's deemed to be hate speech or misinformation, Facebook can be fined by the government massive amounts of money. It's like more than $1 million if they don't remove the post within 24 hours, I believe is the rule. So think about that. That's what the left wants. They want more of those kinds of laws so that the federal government can go to Facebook and say, you got to stop Donald Trump from saying X, Y, and Z, or you got to stop this person over here from saying that, because that's a form of hate speech. That's a dog whistle. That's misinformation. What they're saying is not the science. Like, that's the kind of stuff that they want to do. And so unless Republicans win everything in this upcoming election, which seems unlikely to happen, this law is not going to get changed for the better anytime soon. And if Democrats win everything in this upcoming election, it's entirely possible this law could get changed for the worse. So it's an important election, folks. I mean, it's an important election. I'll leave it at that.
So what would happen? Because I know that, obviously conservative types are not happy with the actions of Twitter and Facebook. What would happen if by some type of decree, they're just like, all right, Twitter, you're acting as a publisher, you don't have these 230 protections anymore? Would they just go belly up?
They would
Twitter
sue.
just exist anymore?
They would sue, and it would be tied up in court. And some court would say, I'm going to, prevent the government from shutting you down while we sort this out in the courts. And then it would drag on in the courts for who knows how long. And eventually there would have to be a decision that's made. And that might very well happen. We already know that they're going to, the Senate Republicans almost immediately after this occurred, announced that they're going to call the heads of these social media companies in to testify. They already started with that. In fact, they tweeted something at the CEO of Twitter. His Twitter handle is at Jack, and it said something like, "We'll see you soon at Jack." And so it's like, yeah, they are. I mean, that's the approach they want to take. But of course, it doesn't really matter ultimately until you got to change the law. I mean, the idea that this is going to get sorted out without changing the law is probably not realistic. Courts may further elaborate and define what this law means and try to get this a little bit clearer. But the reality is, it's so vaguely worded. I don't even know how a court could make a determination here. It's just poorly written. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
So obviously I don't like the way that Twitter and Facebook is acting, and they're getting the protections of a open platform, but they're, being able to do stuff as if they're acting as if they're a publisher. But generally speaking, I like the idea of these open platforms and like the 230 protections. I get it.
Yeah.
Like we make a video on YouTube, we put it up there, it just gets published, because they don't have to worry about getting sued for the content that we're putting up there, right? Mm-hmm. But like if it devoid of those 230 protections and they still wanted to exist, and I don't think that this would be a realistic way of existence, but if we wanted to post something on YouTube and they didn't have those protections, they'd have to look through it, make sure there's nothing that they can get sued about before allowing us to publish it. So like that just seems like a terrible system if we're completely without these Section 230 protections. I just wonder what the look of social media would be without those.
It would be even more biased than it is now, because once they have to start making those decisions, why would they allow someone they disagree with to post on their platform? There would be no reason for it. They would just say, well, if we're going to have to ban people and censor everything, then we might as well censor the people we don't like too. Sure. So ironically, it would just cause what it would do is it would create social media. It would make more social media companies so that conservatives would have their social media companies where the content is limited but vetted. And then there would be other social media companies where the content is limited and vetted, really kind of like what they have at Red State. What Red State has historically been, where they have third parties can go in there and they can post. They have users that can go in there and they can post articles. And it's like lots of people can post lots of different articles on Red State, right? And Red State's responsible for all of that to some degree. And they have to go in there and they got to check it and they got to do all this stuff. That would be what social media is. You wouldn't have this big, gigantic social media worlds anymore where you've got millions and millions of users on a platform. It would be much smaller users. It would be little communities that have lots of moderators and lots of vetting. And it's just not, I don't think that that's what the world, especially younger people, they don't want that world. They want these big, gigantic social media universes where they can talk to millions of people and become famous and do all this other stuff. Like that's what they want. And so the idea that we're going to just blow up Twitter, blow up Facebook, blow all these companies up, like I don't see that as being realistic. Now, from an antitrust perspective, that's like a totally different story. But from a Section 230 perspective, there's no way that's going to happen. So we need a new law. I mean, that's ultimately what it comes down to. We have to have a new law. Otherwise, we're going to keep having these battles. Facebook and Twitter are going to keep pushing the envelope, seeing how much they can get away with, pushing the boundaries, and courts are going to have to try to rein them in a little bit at times, and on it will go forever until we have a better law.
We only need a new law because Twitter and Facebook have have broken the contract.
Yep.
The social contract, the gentleman's understanding, whatever you want to call it, that they would have and treat people fairly. This has been coming. This blew up this week, but this blow up has been coming for a long time because the left, as you mentioned, Justin, is not interested in free speech. What would happen is that if Twitter had, if basically Section 230 was taken away from Twitter, they would become leftist Twitter. We call it socialist Twitter all the time. It's a joke, and it's true. They would become socialist Twitter, and then the people that actually are interested in other, so then you would have conservative Twitter, fine, right? But guess what? Conservatives are actually interested in having a debate by and large in general. So they actually tolerate, conservatives in general tolerate other viewpoints and would actually like to get into discussions with things. The leftists who run Twitter are not interested in debate. They're interested in winning elections, and they're interested in getting rid of disinformation, which is anything they just happen to disagree with, is disinformation. That's where we are now. And we've been moving on that road for a long time. Back from, like I said, when the LA Times decided that, climate realism letters to the editor are spreading disinformation. It's sick where we've come, but we've been on this road for a long time.
That is true. Isaac, do you have any Taco Bell analogies to tack onto this conversation?
No, they took them all off the menu.
Dang it. Well, we don't really have time to go into the other topic that I wanted to talk about. So
well, we don't have time to tackle COVID-19.
No.
In 5 minutes.
In 4.5 minutes?
No, we'll have to save that. But yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting, and I like you were saying, this has been a long time coming. I really think that it's gotten worse, and it's going to continue to get worse. And I really think that like the big target in the future is going to be climate change denial, quote unquote. Absolutely. And Heartland Institute will probably be at the forefront of that. So we'll be sacrificed on the altar of what's acceptable speech on social media at some point.
I'm throwing you guys all under the bus.
Well,
you guys made me say it. You made me do it.
Yeah.
Oh, Isaac, you'll be in there too, man.
I'll be fine.
No.
Yeah, he's an independent contractor. He's going to
Isaac's just going to drift away into what do you call it? What's the world that you live in where you're what is it? You're not gentry. What are you? You're the landowning class. What do you call them?
Yeah, we're the landed gentry.
The landed gentry, right? Yeah. You're just going to drift back into that. And
yeah, exactly.
Rule over all your subjects and everything.
Yeah, I'll have a stable with horses and everything. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
The other thing is, Justin, you told me that there's like another story coming out with this whole Hunter Biden thing. So I think over the next couple of weeks, we're going to see drips and drabs of more of these kind of leaked, not leaked emails, but just released emails. So I'll be curious to see, like with the next story, what Twitter is going to do. Are they going to censor that one? Are they going to, the blowback was so bad we'll allow this next one?
It's pretty bad. It's a bad situation because the New York Post, I think the New York Post published a story today about some emails related to China and that there may have been some deals that had been going on there and that Joe Biden may have been involved in that too, but certainly Hunter Biden was. They have all kinds of stuff on that hard drive, and I think they are going to release numerous stories. And the same justification that you would use for banning it yesterday will be there a week from now, because it's all coming from the same thing. It's all coming from the same source. So,
and that source is Hunter Biden.
It's unbelievable.
Hunter Biden. It's known that Hunter Biden had tagged along with his old man on Air Force Two on trips to China, on official business trips. So this is, you put all these, it's not very hard to put these pieces together and to see what happens in the puzzle. And yes, Twitter will try to suppress it again. And I have a clip of it. And I don't need to play the clip, but Biden actually was, I thought it was funny. Biden put a lid on about 9 a.m. Eastern on Wednesday, just after the New York Post story started. So you have, so it was like, it's actually not unusual for Joe Biden to put a lid on at 9 a.m. He did that 15 times in September. I know, he's got to get his sleep. He has to have his mid-morning nap, and maybe he won't wake, it won't be any good then. But, so basically when this story hits, Joe Biden hides. And his spokespeople pretty much hide from them all day long. But I saw a clip. Jamal Brown is the press secretary for the Biden campaign, and he was asked about this and about the Twitter suppression of it, and he said, "quote that Twitter's response, basically not allowing people to see this story, quote, makes it clear that these allegations are false." That is exactly why Twitter.
It's a nice self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, talk about, it's a completely circular argument. That is proof, if you needed any more of it, that the Democratic Party is working hand in hand with the social media giants to get Joe Biden elected and suppressing anything that would work against that activity. And again, the top guys in communications and decision making for what's put out on these social media platforms and what isn't are all former high-level, lifelong Democratic operatives.
Well, that's because Sean Spicer was on Dancing with the Stars. Stars. What did you expect?
Tucker Carlson was on was with Dancing with the Stars, like season 2.
Exactly. So like conservatives, like they opt for television instead of social media. What are you complaining about?
We can't share this because it's fake news. How do you know it's fake news? Because we're not sharing it.
This is banana. This is like Banana Republic stuff.
All right.
Sure.
All right. We're done. We're done for the episode. Thank you all for tuning in for this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Join us every Friday for a new episode. If you like our show, please subscribe, write a review for us on iTunes. Would be greatly appreciated. You could find us on pretty much everything: Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube, SoundCloud, pretty much everything nowadays. If you'd like, you can follow us on socialist Twitter at In the Tank Pod. If you want to send us your comments, suggestions, questions, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Justin, where can the people find you?
At Justin T. Askins on Facebook and Twitter, while they are still allowing free speech.
That's right.
So who knows? It may not be there tomorrow. Just if I'm not there tomorrow, it's because I've been censored.
Yeah, you've been Thanos snapped. Jim Lakely, where can the people find you?
You can find me at J Lakely on Twitter. You can also follow the Heartland Institute's account at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always go to heartland.org.
Yeah, well, all that stuff still exists. Isaac Orr, how about you?
You can find my writings every single day on AmericanExperiment.org.
And he's also the fracking guy on Twitter, socialist Twitter. Thank you all for joining us. We will talk to you next week.